There's a corner of the internet that feels like watching someone you shouldn't. A live feed of a stranger's life. A person who looks terrified, exhausted, and very, very real. Her name was Chip-chan, or at least that's what she called herself online. And what began as a random discovery on a live webcam in South Korea became one of the most haunting mysteries in internet history. The story begins in the mid-2000s, when live camera streams were still new. Digital windows into other people's homes, bedrooms, and their lives. Most were harmless, people testing technology or chasing novelty. But then, one day, an anonymous viewer stumbled across something different. A woman's apartment. In a cluttered room, dimly lit by daylight seeping through half-drawn curtains. On the bed, a woman lay perfectly still. Her name, as the overlay on the feed, identified her as Chip-chan. She wasn't talking, she wasn't performing, she wasn't even moving, just lying there, motionless for hours. At first, people thought it was a corpse. Messages flooded the live chat. Some viewers begged her to wake up, and others called the police. Days passed before she stirred, and when she did, she sat up slowly, dazed and disorientated, glancing at the camera like she'd forgotten it was there. Then she began to write. She filled notebooks, scraps of paper, even her own walls with writing. A mix of Korean and English scrawled in permanent marker. Words like police 474, remote control, and brain chip. She claimed she was being monitored and controlled by a corrupt police officer named 474. According to her, he had implanted a device in her body, one that could control her thoughts, movements, and even her sleep. The camera, she said, wasn't for attention. It was for proof. She was streaming her life, she said, because she feared what would happen if she didn't. Over the many years that followed, more viewers found the stream. Her room became infamous on obscure forums and image boards. An endless vigil where the internet watched and tried to understand. Sometimes she'd appear awake, typing at her computer, pacing nervously, or praying in front of a handwritten note taped to the wall. Other times she'd sleep for days, unmoving, face buried in the sheets, the room dim except for the flickering light of a monitor. It was hypnotic and also horrifying. Because this wasn't found footage, it wasn't fiction, it was live. A woman's real apartment, her real body, her real fear, broadcasted 24 hours a day. The story spread to Reddit, 4chan, and later YouTube. Each corner of the internet builds its own theory. Some said she was mentally ill, suffering from a delusional disorder, convinced she was being watched and controlled. Others believed something far darker, that she truly was being monitored, forced to live under constant surveillance, and that the stream was her only way to stay alive. Others believed something far darker, that she truly was being monitored, forced to live under constant surveillance, and that the stream was her only way to stay alive. There were clues, or at least what looked like them. Documents on her desk, strange notes taped to the walls. At one point, she left a sign reading, "He's watching me. If I stop moving, it's because he's controlling me." Viewers dissected every frame and looked for hidden meaning. Some zoomed in on her eyes, believing they saw micro-expressions of fear. Others tracked the timestamps on her sleep patterns, convinced she was drugged or restrained. But the truth never got any clearer. The more people watched, the less sense it made. At one point, police were reportedly contacted. Authorities visited her apartment in Seoul. She was alive, and she was not being held hostage. They described her as eccentric but unharmed. After each welfare check, she always came back online, pale, trembling, muttering prayers, the walls behind her covered in new warnings written in thick red marker. She claimed the police who visited her were working with 474. The cycle repeated for years. Her feed would go offline for weeks or months, and every time it returned, the apartment looked the same. A little messier, a little older, the same scattered papers, the same haunting paranoia etched into every corner of the frame. To watch Chip Chan was to step into a space between documentary and nightmare. She was alive, you could see her breathe, but something about it felt like death in slow motion. The lighting, the clutter, the dead air between movements, it all made the feed feel haunted, even though there were no ghosts. Only a woman, alone, begging the internet to believe her. As years passed, her legend deepened. People mirrored her streams and archived her images. Some tried to communicate with her through chat, others sent messages of sympathy or even curiosity, but she rarely ever responded, and when she did, it was in cryptic fragments. Bible verses, accusations, prayers, and references to the mysterious 474. She began to age on camera. Her hair grayed, her movements slowed, and the paranoia hardened into ritual. The walls filled with crosses, cameras, and handwritten signs. Her online alias spread across conspiracy channels and horror forums, where she was called the most watched woman on the internet. People didn't just talk about her, they were obsessed over her. Because she was the perfect riddle, too real to dismiss and too strange to explain. And one of the most unsettling updates, she wrote the 474 had learned how to control her remotely, forcing her to fall asleep whenever he wanted. She said the only way to resist was to stream constantly and to keep the world watching. As long as people were observing, he couldn't hurt her. And so she lived that way, in a state of permanent exposure. Her bedroom became a prison with invisible bars, and the internet became her witness. By the 2010s, her story had turned into legend, discussed on creepypasta websites, explored by YouTubers, and referenced in horror games and ARGs. But the unsettling thing is, Chip Chan never disappeared. She's still out there. Sometimes her streams vanish for months, and even years. Then suddenly a new one resurfaces. A family apartment, an aging woman muttering into a webcam, still terrified of a man named 474. The connection cuts in and out. The resolution flickers and the world looks smaller. And still, she writes. But who is she really? Most researchers now believe Chip Chan suffers from paranoid schizophrenia or delusional disorder, her world warped by a fixed belief that she's being controlled. Others still hold on to the idea that something truly sinister is actually happening, that she's the victim of long-term psychological abuse. But no matter the truth, the effect is the same. Her story became a mirror for the darkest parts of internet voyeurism, our morbid fascination with other people's suffering. We tell ourselves we're just observing, but deep down, we know we're watching and judging. Watching someone lose themselves on camera, watching someone's pain become content. And once you've seen it, the cluttered room and the motionless figure, it's impossible to forget. Even now, if you search hard enough, you can find her. Still streaming, still praying, and still afraid. Sometimes she stares at the camera for hours, as if daring you to look away first. Other times she's asleep, her body curled up in the same spot where it all began. The internet loves to solve mysteries, to peel back the layers until the truth is clean and simple. But this one refuses to be solved. Because whether Chip Chan is a victim, a believer, or a woman lost in her own imagination, her suffering is real, and her fear is real. And so is the feeling you get when you watch her. That quiet, creeping sense that you're seeing something you were never meant to. It's one of the strangest and most unforgettable moments in television history. A broadcast hijacking that felt less like a prank and more like a message from another world. It's November 22nd, 1987, Chicago, and for a few disorientating minutes, The city's television airwaves don't belong to the stations anymore. They belong to him. The night begins normally enough. WGN-TV is wrapping up its 9 o'clock news. Sports anchor Dan Roan is reading the highlights when the screen suddenly shudders. Static floods the broadcast. The signal twists, and then he appears. A man wearing a distorted plastic mask, a parody of the British cyber satire character Max Headroom, bobbing and swaying in front of a sheet of corrugated metal. Behind him, someone waves another piece of metal back and forth, creating a rippling, low-tech illusion, as if reality itself is melting. No one at home can quite make out what he's saying. His voice is warped, high-pitched, slurred beyond recognition. The feed lasts barely 30 seconds before WGN's engineers regain control and cut back to the studio. Dan Roan looks into the camera, confused but calm, and mutters,
"Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I."
The audience laughs nervously. The broadcast continues, and for a moment it seems like the strange interruption was nothing more than a glitch. But then it happens again. Almost 2 hours later, during a PBS broadcast of Doctor Who on channel WTTW, the same figure bursts onto the screen. This time the engineers aren't fast enough to stop him. For a full 90 seconds, Chicago's televisions are held hostage by what can only be described as a fever dream. The masked man moans and laughs, jerking his body with erratic, cartoonish movements. His distorted voice slips between gibberish and half-coherent rambling. At one point, a woman's voice, off camera, gives muffled commands, like someone directing the performance. Then comes the part burned into every viewer's memory. The man bends over and is struck on the backside with a fly swatter. The mask shifts and he howls with laughter. And then, just like that, the image dissolves back into static. The stations are thrown into chaos. Engineers scramble to figure out what just happened. The FCC is called and reporters gather statements. Hijacking a public broadcast is a federal crime, but in 1987 this wasn't supposed to be possible. You couldn't just upload yourself onto the airways, not without access to serious equipment. Television signals at the time relied on microwave relays, known as studio-to-transmitter links. These links sent the live broadcast from a studio downtown up to a transmitter, often sitting on a skyscraper or tower, which then beamed it across the whole city. If someone could send a stronger microwave signal to that receiver, that's what the hijackers did. They didn't break into the station. They didn't hack a computer. They simply overpowered the signal. It sounds simple, but to do it, you'd need expensive equipment, knowledge of broadcast frequencies, and precise timing. You'd have to know exactly when and where the transmitter's signal was vulnerable. Whoever they weren't amateurs. The FCC launched an immediate investigation. Agents analyzed the footage, questioned engineers, and traced micro-relays. But the investigation went nowhere. There were no fingerprints, no confessions, and no equipment recovered. The pirate's signal had been so brief that triangulating it afterwards was almost impossible. By the time federal agents arrived on the scene, all they had was the tape, and that haunting, plastic smile frozen in grainy VHS quality. For a while, the stations were humiliated. It wasn't just a prank, it was a public exposure of how fragile the airwaves really were. The illusion of control, shattered by a few seconds of chaos. Over time, the event became simply known as the Max Headroom Broadcast Incident, and what was once called a local embarrassment evolved into something much stranger, a piece of urban folklore, an unsolved technological ghost story. On the surface, it looked like nothing more than a bizarre joke, a man in a mask waving a piece of metal, but to viewers it felt wrong. Not funny, not silly, but wrong. There's something about the low-fidelity horror of 1980s analog video that makes it more disturbing than anything polished. The flickering light, the warbling audio, the way the mask hides just enough of the face to make you imagine what's underneath. People who watch it live still describe the moment as unreal, like seeing something crawl through the television and into their living room. Because that's what it was, a violation. Television in the 1980s wasn't just entertainment, it was trusted. The news, the shows, the anchors, the faces that came into your home every night. And suddenly, someone broke through that trust with a mask. Theories bloomed like static. Some said it was a group of radio hobbyists, maybe a few engineers or college pranksters with access to the right gear. Others believed it to be an insider, someone who worked in broadcasting, who knew exactly how to intercept a signal. One rumor pointed to a technician with a grudge against WGN. Another insisted it was an art collective, making an anti-television statement. And a few, of course, decided the incident was something else entirely. A coded message, a ritual, a glimpse into an underground network that used public frequencies to communicate. But the FBI never confirmed anything. No arrests were made, and the case quietly faded into the background, filed away as unsolved. And maybe that's the most chilling part. The idea that someone out there pulled off one of the most famous acts of broadcast piracy in history, and got away with it completely. As decades passed, the footage resurfaced online, where new generations discovered it for the first time. The internet turned it into a relic, part creepypasta, part conspiracy, and part performance art. People analyzed every frame. They enhanced the audio, slowed down the laughter, compared the metal backdrop to warehouses near the WTTW transmitter site. They debated the symbolism of the props, the strange references to Max Headroom's corporate satire, and the deeper meaning of it all. But in the end, maybe it didn't mean anything at all. Maybe that's the point. The act itself was the message, a reminder that even the systems we trust most can be invaded by nonsense. That someone, somewhere, can reach through the static and make the world stop, if only for a minute. Today, the Max Headroom hijack feels almost prophetic. Before deepfakes, before internet hacks, and before viral misinformation, there was this. A man in a rubber mask breaking through the screen and laughing at how easy it was. The incident showed how fragile our sense of control really is, and how easily the familiar can twist into the uncanny. It was a glitch that revealed the wires beneath the illusion, and that's why decades later people still replay it in the dark, and they still whisper about the man behind the mask, and the signal that came out of nowhere, and the laughter that didn't sound human. Because for those 90 seconds in 1987, the line between television and nightmare disappeared. In 2012, a YouTube account surfaced that would come to define one of the most disturbing intersections between real tragedy and online obsession. The name of the account was Mr. 112 Dirtbag, and if you know the case of Maura, that name alone should send a chill down your spine. Maura was 21 years old, a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. By all accounts, she was bright, and ambitious, and deeply loved by her family. But in early February of 2004, something changed. On February 9th, Maura packed her car with clothes, textbooks, and personal belongings. She emailed her professors saying there had been a family emergency and she'd be taking a week off from classes. The problem was there was no emergency, and her own family didn't even know she was leaving. The same afternoon, she withdrew nearly $280 from an ATM, purchased alcohol, and began driving north toward the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Hours later, on Route 112, she crashed her car into a snowbank. When police arrived minutes later, Maura was gone. Her car was locked, her belongings still inside, but there were no footprints in the snow, no signs of a struggle, and no trace of her ever again. It was as if she had simply disappeared. In the years that followed, Maura's disappearance became one of the most discussed missing person cases of the early internet. Message boards, blogs, and eventually Reddit threads exploded with theories. Some rational, and others spiraling into dark speculation. Her father, Fred Murray, grew desperate, even angry. In an interview, he referred to anyone who might have been involved as a dirtbag. It was an offhand comment, but it stuck, because years later that single word would return in the most horrifying way possible. In late 2011, a new YouTube channel appeared, Mr. 112 Dirtbag. The username immediately stood out to anyone who followed the case. 112, the exact route where Maura vanished, and Dirtbag, the word her father had used to describe the person responsible. The channel's first uploads seemed nonsensical, short grainy clips of a middle-aged man speaking incoherently, often in dim lighting and sometimes outdoors. The footage looked like it had been filmed in an old webcam or camcorder. The man's eyes never quite met the camera. But then, on February 9th, 2012, the 8th anniversary of Maura's disappearance, a new video appeared. Its title was simple: Happy Anniversary. The video was only about a minute long, but that minute would burn itself into the minds of anyone who saw it. It begins with a close-up on the man's face, partially illuminated. His expression is blank at first, and then he starts to laugh. Not a light chuckle, and not the laughter of someone amused. It's an unbroken, guttural cackle, hysterical and manic. It grows louder and more distorted as it continues, until the man looks into the camera and smiles. Then the video cuts to black. The reaction online was immediate. Viewers were horrified, convinced they were looking directly into the face of Maura Murray's killer. The timing was too perfect, the username was too specific, and the tone too sinister to be a coincidence. People began combing through the man's other uploads, looking for clues. Some showed him sitting in what appeared to be a darkened lodge room. Others displayed ticket stubs or receipts, allegedly from motels and lodges in New Hampshire, dated around February 2004, when Maura went missing. A few videos even appeared to have been filmed near Route 112 itself, the same road where her car was found abandoned. Every upload seemed to mock the case in some way, as if the creator wanted to be caught, or at the very least wanted people to believe he was involved. Internet sleuths tried everything to track him down. They compared his face to mugshots, voice samples, even facial recognition programs. Some believe he was a local man who'd once been questioned by police. Others thought he might have been an obsessed fan of the case, taunting Maura's grieving family for attention. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the channel vanished. The videos were deleted and the account was terminated. But by then it was too late. The Happy Anniversary video had been copied, archived, and re-uploaded countless times, and the legend of 112 Dirtbag was born. To this day, no one knows who the man in the videos was. Law enforcement never confirmed any link between him and Maura's disappearance. In fact, there's no concrete proof that the videos had anything to do with her at all, beyond their chilling timing and the reference in the name. Still, the internet wasn't ready to let it go, because whether or not he had anything to do with her disappearance, there was something deeply wrong about the man behind the camera. Something about the way he laughed, like he knew exactly how disturbing he sounded, like he wanted people to watch, to imagine the worst. The face in that video became a kind of symbol of the way the internet can twist tragedy into entertainment. In the years that followed, true crime forums picked the case apart. Some tried to analyze the room lighting in the video, arguing it matched a certain motel near the crash site. Others slowed down the audio, believing they heard faint words between the bursts of laughter. A whispered, "She's gone," or "They'll never find her." But those findings never held up, and eventually, like most online mysteries, the trail went cold. The leading theory today is that 112 Dirtbag was simply an attention seeker, someone mentally unwell, or someone looking to insert himself into a famous, unsolved mystery, it wouldn't be the first time. Cases like JonBenet Ramsey, Madeleine McCann, and even the Zodiac Killer have all attracted false confessors, people desperate to be associated with infamy, even if they had nothing to do with the actual crime itself. But even if he was just a hoaxer, there's something about that kind of a person that's equally unsettling. Because what kind of mind finds joy in mocking grief? What kind of person celebrates the anniversary of someone else's disappearance with a laugh? In a strange way, 112 Dirtbag became a part of Maura's story, not because he was ever proven guilty, but because he embodied the darkness that follows every tragedy once it reaches the internet, the chaos of conspiracy theories, the hunger for answers that never come, and the people who turn pain into a performance. We may never know who the man behind the screen really was, or even what his motives truly were. But for Maura's family, and the countless strangers who tried to bring her home, his presence added another layer of horror to an already heartbreaking mystery.